Titanic. In 1912, this giant ocean liner was sunk by an iceberg. 1,500 people died. In 1985, her wreck was found. But today, we still don't fully understand what happened to her.
How she broke her back is still under investigation.
Now, an elite team is leaving to unravel the mystery of exactly how Titanic broke up.
There are things down there on Titanic that have still not been seen. There are things on Titanic that are not understood.
Their aim is to find new evidence that will reveal once and for all the dramatic truth about Titanic's final moments.
Oh my God. Unbelievable.
It's the summer of 2005. From the calm waters of eastern Canada, a crack team is leaving for the ocean depths. Their mission? To explore the wreck of Titanic and solve the mystery of her final moments. Leading the investigation are Richie Kohler and John Chatterton, technical divers and expert shipwreck explorers.
With the attention that has been given to Titanic, you would almost think that the story has been told, but in fact, it hasn't. The dive itself is so complex, difficult, and reliant on technology that every single dive only gets so much information.
There are things down there on Titanic that have still not been seen. There are things on Titanic that are not understood.
Titanic, the most well-known shipwreck in the world. This is an imposing icon for somebody that's interested in shipwrecks. This is the single place to be.
To help them, Chatterton and Kohler have assembled an elite group with experts in fields from underwater imaging to naval architecture.
Inference has gotten piled on inference until it's become fact and build up this whole myth of the sinking. Calling it a myth doesn't mean that it's wrong. That in fact could be the story. But it just means that it really hasn't been proven in the kind of rigorous way that you would really want to build history around.
The team has been at sea for less than a day, and the prospect of bad weather is already putting the whole mission in jeopardy. Tensions are high. The captain of their Russian ship, Anatoly Sagaleyevich, calls everyone together.
But anyhow, I would like to say welcome on board our ship. I hope...
The team is nervous, and Anatoly has bad news. A storm in the North Atlantic is gaining strength and heading for the wreck site. There's no time to spare.
I think that we have 3 double dives. I think that we will do it during 4 days.
The team will now have just 3 dives. They had been counting on more.
Thank you very much. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Have a nice day.
It's day 2 of the expedition to Titanic, and the team is now over halfway to the wreck site. But with only 3 dives, every second underwater will be vital as they search for what they hope will be crucial evidence.
We are here to try and look in a new area, because what I believe is in this area is evidence that could change the commonly held beliefs about the sinking of the Titanic and what actually happened on the night of April 14th, 1912.
The generally accepted theory of Titanic sinking is that she suffered damage along her side. But the team believe Titanic also ran over the iceberg, damaging her bottom. This scenario is called the grounding theory.
The icebergs tend to, as the top melts, they tend to have these very long projections. And that causes me to lean towards the grounding theory. It would be very surprising if there wasn't something under that iceberg for them to ground on and to damage the bottom.
5 years ago, team member David Concannon made what he believes was a significant find.
We found what we believe are sections of the hull, long sections as if a potato had been peeled back, ribbons of steel, far, 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 far south of the known area of the wreck site.
The sections of hull David believes he saw in 2000 would have reinforced the grounding theory and dramatically changed the picture of how Titanic sank. But then, disaster struck.
We were firing off hundreds of still photographs, and unfortunately, when we came to the surface, we discovered that the film was not advancing in the camera.
The proof he needed had slipped through his fingers. Now, 5 years on, David and the team are going back to look for the ribbons of steel. But it's a daunting task. The wreckage is spread over a huge area.
Our goal is to somehow, some way, get back to this location where David Concannon dove in the year 2000, document it with film and video, and then see if we can link that to the rest of the shipwreck.
But with the weather closing in, the odds are stacked against this expedition. And an already difficult task now looks more like Mission Impossible. There's less than a day to go until the Titanic expedition reaches the site of the wreck. The team's aim is to uncover new evidence which will solve the mystery about what happened in the ship's final moments. With the first dive imminent, it's an exciting moment for lead divers John Chatterton and Richie Kohler. Anatoly Zagaleyevich gives them their first tour of the state-of-the-art Mir submersibles, which will take them 2.5 miles down. At just 25 feet long and 12 feet wide, the Mirs can dive 20,000 feet, almost 4 miles. Outside, they carry thrusters for maneuvering, remote manipulator arms, and high-definition cameras.
Now, as we change...
Inside, there's gear for navigation, life support,
Does that make it?
temperature monitoring, as well as some other essentials.
Here we usually put some pee bottles.
That hasn't changed much over the years.
Every inch of wall space is covered with the tools that we're going to need to get the job done down there.
Everything is very utilitarian. Everything serves a purpose. There's nothing that's really for creature comfort.
In less than 24 hours, John and Richie will be 2.5 miles under the sea, face to face with Titanic. Titanic's life started in 1909, when work began on her in a Belfast shipyard. She was built to carry people emigrating to America. Her vast size reflected the huge demand and a desire for profit, but safety was still a priority.
Titanic was as safe as any other vessel in the world in 1912. The watertight bulkheads were of the most modern and certainly of the highest quality. Everything about that ship was done to first-class specifications.
Titanic was designed with 16 watertight compartments, plus a double bottom.
She was described as a 2-compartment ship, which meant if any 2 of the compartments were flooded, she could stay afloat. And in fact, if she was flooded in 3 or even 4 compartments, she could stay afloat.
In June 1911, a Belfast newspaper and shipbuilder magazine both described Titanic as practically unsinkable. A comment echoed by the ship's captain, Edward J. Smith.
I cannot imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. I cannot conceive of any vital disaster happening to this vessel. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that.
There had never been, certainly in Smith's lifetime, a serious incident involving a large passenger vessel resulting in serious loss of life. So I think he was lulled into a false sense of security.
On April 10th at midday, Titanic departed Southampton on her fateful voyage. 2,200 people were on board. A crew of 900 and 1,300 passengers. Initially, the weather was good, but then the ship received half a dozen ice warnings. Captain Smith moved his course 10 miles to the south, but he failed to post extra lookouts or to slow down.
All North Atlantic officers were taught to keep up the pace, keep to the schedule, and that was standard. Captain Smith really wasn't doing anything different that night. I think he just thought, as most of his officers thought, that if there is any danger ahead, we will see it in time and we will be able to get around it.
But they didn't. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Fred Fleet sounded the alarm. Iceberg, right ahead. Trying to swerve around the iceberg, Titanic sideswiped it, bumping along in a series of blows. Rivets gave way, and seams between plates burst open. But was that the only damage? Eyewitness reports from the disaster inquiries point to a mystery that has never been solved. An hour and 40 minutes after the collision, water was coming into boiler room number 4, not from the side, but from underneath.
Now, boiler room number 4 was not damaged by the side damage from the iceberg. Therefore, that could indicate that there was additional damage beneath the double bottom.
Titanic was doomed. The fate of those on board lay with Captain Edward J. Smith. Titanic's 20 lifeboats would only hold 1,200 people. 1,000 others had nowhere to go.
Captain Smith, then as now, is God. Absolutely, completely in command. Every aspect of the control and operation of the ship, the behaviour of the passengers, everything.
But no one realized the lifeboats could be launched fully loaded. The first went with 37 seats, empty, and dozens of seats in other boats were left untaken.
Whatever way you look at it, there are unnecessary deaths. Doesn't matter whether there weren't enough lifeboats on the Titanic to start with. Captain Smith allowed lifeboats to be launched from the Titanic that were not filled to its stated capacity. That is an absolute failure of duty.
At 2:05 a.m., most third-class passengers reached the boat deck, but they had nowhere to go.
By the time most of the lifeboats had been lowered, it was too late for the passengers from third class to reach them because they were so far down in the ship.
10 minutes later, Titanic's stern rose higher. Terrible sounds began. At 2:20 a.m., the ship's stern slid beneath the waves. 1,500 people ended up in the freezing water.
The very few survivors that were actually pulled from the water just minutes after they had gone into the water remember it being like 1,000 knives being stuck into them.
Despite cries for help, almost none of the half-empty lifeboats went back to pull survivors from the water. 2 hours after the sinking, the Cunard liner Carpathia arrived and retrieved the survivors from the lifeboats. Sunrise revealed an enormous field of ice. And floating bodies. 1,500 people had perished. The expedition has now reached the same waters where so many lost their lives. 2.5 miles beneath them is the wreck of Titanic. Anatoly starts his morning briefing.
Okay, good morning, доброе утро. We open new page in our diving on Titanic. Real history page.
Anatoly will take John Chatterton and David Concannon in Mir 1 to Titanic's stern, then head south to search for the ribbons of steel Concannon saw in 2000. Genya will pilot Mir 2. He will start at the bow, carrying Richie Kohler and Ralph White. Their objective is to document the wreck's deterioration, then explore the debris field.
Weather very rough, but I think that we will be lucky.
Everything is riding on these dives. If they can't find and photograph Concannon's ribbons of steel, the experts will have nothing to analyze, and the expedition will have failed.
Here we go. And we got our feet wet. And that's it, baby. We've just splashed down and we're right below the surface.
Я Мир 2, 11.
The Mirs descend at 100 feet per minute. After 2 hours, Richie and Ralph in Mir 2 finally approach the bow of the wreck.
Oh my God. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Look at that. Oh man. Oh wow. That's one of the cranes for picking up the anchors. Oh my God. Look at that.
The wreck of Titanic is an amazing sight and occupies more than a square mile. The bow and stern sections are 800 meters apart, the bow pointing north and the stern south. Incredibly, even though the bow is deteriorating, some features are clearly intact, like the portside anchor, weighing over 7 tons. Behind the bridge, the officers' quarters, Captain Smith's cabin, and his bathtub. And up the mast, the hatchway for the lookouts. After climbing up through the mast, they would emerge here to stand watch in the crow's nest, now gone. From this spot, lookout Fred Fleet saw the iceberg. Half a mile away, Mir 1 is heading south to Titanic's stern. Unlike the bow, the stern section is almost unrecognizable. It's an extraordinary scene of utter devastation. Only a few features are still intact. Clearly visible at the edge of the break is Titanic's double bottom. Also a massive engine, as tall as a 5-story building, and the huge propellers. The uppermost deck of the stern, called the poop deck, is peeled back like a tin can. Mir 1 moves to 600 meters south of the stern, searching for the ribbons of steel.
Now, we are far away from the wreck.
We're right where we should be, actually. I remember some of these big bowls. We saw a big cooking pot.
David Concannon recognizes a familiar rise on the bottom.
There's a hill. There's a hill, and there's dishes on the hill.
You've got all kinds of stuff. This is a bona fide debris field.
Then, suddenly, what seems like a breakthrough.
Yeah. I've got some steel over here. What's this? Yeah? Piece of steel. This is something.
Yeah, there's a big piece of steel. Woo!
Yeah, right. I was not crazy.
This is the big boy.
Concannon thinks it's the same location as his dive 5 years earlier. But something isn't right.
Right where we said it was, but what is it? Doesn't look to me like double bottom, but that's
It's a boxed out beam of some sort.
Whatever this debris is, it's definitely not what they were looking for. The ribbons of steel from Titanic's double-bottom hull.
It looks like where we were before, but we really don't know. Now, this doesn't make any sense.
In Mir 2, Richie is anxious for an update.
Mir 1, this is Mir 2. John?
John, can you hear me?
Yeah, John, I read you loud and clear. You know I'm dying to hear. Did you find the ribbon of steel?
Negative.
10-4 on that. 10-4, copy negative.
The first dive is over. The team were unable to find the ribbons of steel they were looking for. Concannon may have misjudged what he saw in 2000. Or they may have been looking in the wrong place.
We got down to that area. The hill was there, the metal was there, the ribbons of steel that I saw before we missed, which is they weren't where I thought they were, or we missed them entirely.
Some people would say that not finding the ribbons of steel would be a bust. I don't look at it that way. I think that anytime you look outside the box, you expand the search, you're going to have to look at a lot of mud bottom, you're going to have to look at a lot of empty areas to find stuff.
Either way, the team now have just 2 dives left to find what they came for. The pressure is on. It's the 3rd day of the Titanic expedition. On the first dive, the team were unable to find the ribbons of steel, the evidence which would have proved Titanic suffered damage to her bottom as well as her side. With just 2 dives left, they debriefed to urgently assess the situation.
It didn't look like double bottom to me. It looked like a box beam, but I couldn't nail it down. A good portion of it is buried. But
the failure to find the ribbons of steel is a major disappointment. But continuing further south, John Chatterton reports they did find an intriguing trail of debris.
It continued on. It seemed to us like a relatively narrow corridor of debris, specifically coal. It literally is a trail that leads you right to the stern of the wreck.
It's like a runway.
A narrow trail, mostly of coal, extends for nearly a mile south of the stern.
Sections of debris.
It suggests Titanic may have traveled a good distance with a sizable hole in her.
This thing had to be opened from the bottom, thousands of feet away.
Yes, and because of the heavy objects that came out that we know would have gone virtually straight down, those are all up near the bow and the stern. So this is a long distance for her to have floated with a hole in her.
No, I think what I'd like to do is to sort of give an idea of the drift of the coal, but I think it's the tape I really want to sort of...
The trail of coal is interesting, but no one's sure if it's significant.
We then quickly moved up onto the wreck, and
Then it's Richie and Ralph's turn.
anchor chain, the captain's, Captain Smith's cabin.
They may not have found any evidence, but the experience has still been profound.
And then came up and followed the main mast up right onto the bridge where we looked at the telemotor. From there, we could actually see all of the, I'd call it pollution. I mean, everybody and their sister has to drop a plaque up there, and it detracts, I think, from the wreck site. The next most dramatic visual for me is to come onto the stern, because for me, that's where the human story of Titanic is. That's where people fought for their lives. It's a very emotional thing. Although that's not going to help us in our search, that is a moment. That's my moment on Titanic.
For the moment, the sections of Titanic's bottom the team was so desperate to find remain a mystery. The next day, they gather to scrutinize every detail of the first dive.
We hadn't come into it from the same direction as before.
That's what's concerning me.
Now, and Simon, at this point, the realization is settling in that this isn't the bottom of the hull.
The only thing that I've seen that even remotely looks like this is the expansion joint.
You know, could be part of the expansion joint.
It's part of the stove.
Kitchen stove?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that would make sense.
You are looking at it.
Meanwhile, Roger Long and Ralph White are making a second dive in the Mir submersible. The expedition is still working on the grounding theory, that Titanic suffered impact to her bottom as well as her side. The objective of this dive is to examine the bilge keels, two narrow strips of steel running along part of the hull. If the theory is right, the starboard bilge keel would almost certainly be damaged. For decades, just finding Titanic remained a fantasy. Almost immediately after she sank, the wreck began inspiring curiosity and intrigue.
Finding the Titanic has been many people's dream. 2.5 miles down in the middle of the Atlantic, it's an extraordinary technological achievement. But yeah, people dream.
Then, in 1985, a joint French-American expedition led by Jean-Louis Michel and Robert Ballard set out to do the impossible. The search began in July.
A lot of this area is flat, muddy bottom. What we were experiencing were days upon days of seeing nothing but mud. So people would get very excited if they saw a rock or a fish.
We had been at sea 56 days. Morale was low, everybody was pretty disappointed. And finally, September 1st, 1:45 in the morning, local Atlantic time, we started coming across debris.
Objects. We saw a pipe, and then eventually we started to see more and more debris.
Bed springs, plates, a lot of coal.
We knew we were coming into something, but we didn't know it was the wreck of the Titanic.
More stuff coming.
And then finally, this huge single-sided boiler with the 3 unique stoking ports.
The boiler! Yes. Fantastic! All right!
We had a picture of a boiler sitting in a warehouse before the Titanic was built.
Everybody kind of looked to see if it was the same boiler.
And it matched perfectly.
That's the Titanic boiler! And there was kind of a yes, 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 you know?
On September the 1st, 1985, after 73 years, Titanic was found. And there was another surprise. She had split in half. Exactly when and how the ship broke apart has never been definitively established.
That breakup is sort of a Pandora's box. But when you add the possibility of grounding damage to the bottom of the ship, a lot of these loose ends and contradictions and unknown things start to fall into place.
If today's expedition can find evidence of grounding damage, this could shed light on Titanic's breakup. Back aboard the ship, the second dive is ending.
Congratulations. Thank you. So, how'd it go? How was it?
We actually got under and could see the curve of the bilge, and I don't see any sign of inner bottom damage. Now, we haven't seen all of it, but there's what's visible.
Roger and Ralph have seen no damage to the starboard bilge keel. No evidence to support the grounding theory.
Well, listen, let's get you a couple of minutes to catch your breath, and we even have dinner for you. So,
welcome back.
And there's more bad news. The weather is closing in. Tropical Storm Irene has turned into a hurricane, and it's getting nearer. The next day, the Mirs are down for maintenance. The grounding theory, the original reason for this expedition, seems dead.
This really weights the balance against the bottom damage theory.
Now, where do we go from here?
The team now have one last chance of success. With just a single dive left, Bill Land suggests a new direction.
Been out there to do a thorough investigation.
There's a lot of heavy debris to the east of the stern. There's some large holes in the 85 and 86 survey in that area. I mean, big enough to hold some major pieces. So, I mean, even though that area was surveyed,
it's an area that hasn't been studied.
There's potential for some.
When we look at the area east of the main body of wreckage, it was originally side scanned in 1985, 1986, but exactly what's out there, they're not sure.
There may be some chunks out there. There could be a big piece of inner bottom. There could be a big chunk of hull.
Spending the last dive on the rarely explored area to the east is a big gamble. It could be a dead end, or they could hit the jackpot.
We could go down there and completely waste an entire day with 2 mere submersibles. So, yeah, there is a significant amount of risk in doing what we're doing, but this is the way it works in exploration.
It's their last chance. The ultimate success or failure of the expedition is riding on this final dive.
I've been involved with many expeditions out to the Titanic, and what I feel really fortunate about being on this expedition is that this expedition is not just looking at making a documentary, but it's looking at trying to solve some questions.
We haven't been able to find it, but who knows, they might get lucky today and find that one little critical piece of evidence that will change the whole story of Titanic.
While the navigators track the near submersibles, the rest of the expedition are forced to wait for news.
Right now, there's nothing we can do. They're down there, they're looking around. We've given them as much information as we can give them. All we can do now is wait and hope that when they come back, they've got what we need.
7 meters. Okay, we're 3 feet off the bottom.
2.5 miles below, one of the Mias has found something.
You see objects?
Oh yeah, I see something now.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, look at that, huh?
Is that part of the bilge keel?
I don't know, John. I can't see out my port yet.
I think that is it. Yes, yes, yes.
We're looking at the bottom of the ship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Yes, 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 yes. That's double hull. That's double hull.
Oh, man, look at this. Wow.
We want to document this thing as well as we can.
They are face to face with a piece of Titanic's bottom. But how far does it extend?
Is this a cross-section with 2 bilge keels?
What are you saying? We're looking at the entire bottom?
Yeah.
The only way you can prove that right now is if we have him turn around and go back over the other side. Okay, yeah, so let's follow it around.
Let's follow it around.
If they follow the edge all the way around and find bilge keel on the other side, that means this piece would be a complete cross-section, spanning the entire width of Titanic's hull.
There's the keel. Oh my God, John, that's the keel. Yeah. This is the keel of Titanic. That's the center of the wreck. Oh yeah. Look at that. There it is.
The center keel is the structural spine of the ship. They keep looking further.
Oh wow, John, maybe you are right.
This is a cross-section.
Wait, it's coming into focus. And wait. And there's the other bilge keel.
We've got all the double hull in there.
Oh my gosh. This is the entire bottom of the ship. The entire bottom from port to starboard.
Yes.
It's an incredible piece of evidence. A huge, intact piece of Titanic's missing bottom.
We've got some kind of cloth below us.
Richard reports back to the ship.
We've confirmed the presence of a bilge keel on both ends. This is an entire section of the bottom of Titanic.
I was going to come find you. They have found what appears to be a complete section of the inner bottom, upside down, with the paint still on it.
Show me where they found it.
Within the hour, there's more amazing news. Mir 2 sights a second intact piece of double bottom, a few hundred yards from the first.
It really is amazing
first thing we hit is something Genya hasn't seen before.
Incredibly, on their last dive, the team have found what could be crucial evidence. Phase 2 now begins.
Where the iceberg has actually
Analyzing what the pieces of double-bottom hull reveal about how the ship broke up.
I would say when the ship sank, that piece literally bounced into the air.
2 months later, a key revelation emerges.
Double-bottom structure right now.
Working from the underwater video, marine artist Ken Marshall creates architectural scale drawings of the pieces. They reveal that the broken edges line up perfectly. These two hull sections were once one.
That is totally awe-inspiring. That is the most significant piece of Titanic footage I've ever seen in my life.
Together, the two pieces account for almost 70 feet of Titanic's bottom, located just beneath and aft of the third funnel, right where she broke apart. These pieces are the best forensic evidence engineers and marine architects have ever had to understand the breakup. The big question is, what exactly will this evidence reveal about Titanic's final moments?
The one thing this expedition did very well was go down and record the edges so we can see exactly what the shape of the steel at the moment it separated. And we can see places where things were pushed together, places where things were bent. And if we can go back and fit all of those pieces together, we may be able to sort of run the movie in reverse and come up with a very good explanation of exactly how the ship came apart.
Months of planning and hard work have reached a climax. The mystery of what exactly happened in Titanic's final moments could be about to be solved. 4 months after the team's expedition to Titanic, they gather for the moment of truth. Will the pieces of Titanic's hull they found reveal anything about the ship's fateful final moments? Since the breakup was confirmed in 1985, most Titanic researchers have come to believe it began just before the final plunge. According to this theory, Titanic reached a high angle, over 30 degrees, and the weight of the unsupported stern caused the structure to fail, cracking from the top down. Though it had to be terrifying, passengers would have known that the end was near. The ship was starting down, and in moments, they would be in the water.
The only thing I could conclude was that this was a much more chaotic...
But to Roger Long, the evidence the expedition found suggests the nature and timing of the breakup may have been different. The edges of the pieces of Titanic's hull came from exactly where the ship broke up, and, crucially, they were cleanly broken off. To Roger, this indicates that the breakup angle was relatively shallow.
The steel doesn't lie. It doesn't protect reputations, it doesn't have false memories, it never forgets. And as we've looked at the steel, no one thing, but all these little indicators seem to point to the shallower angle. We all agree that the stern broke off because it was lifted, and the weight of the water and the weight of the stern working against each other, the ship was being bent like this. And when you bend a long structure like a ship or a girder, the top of it stretches and gets longer, and the bottom gets pushed together. So you've got tension at the top and compression at the bottom, and somewhere in the middle...
Roger believes if the stern snapped off at a high angle, the edges of the break would be pulled apart at the top and pushed together or compressed at the bottom. But the broken edges of the upper decks of Titanic's bow section don't seem to just have been pulled apart. They're mangled and bent steeply downwards. And the edges of the double-bottom hull the expedition found, that should be crushed and compressed, instead appear to have separated cleanly.
If it broke from this high angle, everything up the top side should be quite clean and straight, and all of the chaos and the jumbling and the crunching together should be down at the bottom. And we see exactly the opposite. And furthermore, if it crashed off like in the movie, everything would have separated and we wouldn't have seen these evidence of all these pieces being mashed in on themselves and twisted and so forth. So the key point is that something interrupted the breakup.
Roger now thinks that the breakup began at a shallow angle, perhaps as little as 11 degrees, and progressed in 2 stages.
So what that means basically to me is that the inner bottom broke separately from the ship.
First, the upper structure fails and starts to crack. The crack stops at the double bottom, which is now all that's holding Titanic together. She starts to bend under the strain. The sides separate, and the double bottom starts to fail. Tons of water pull the middle of the ship down, bending Titanic the other way. Upper decks are compressed and mangled together. The bow heads for the bottom. The stern is the last to sink. This scenario, with the breakup starting at a shallower angle, suggests the 1,500 people still aboard may have been caught by surprise.
Ultimately, it's a very different human experience because this whole question of hope comes in. The people are on board a ship that appears to be not sinking very fast. And it was very reasonable at that point to believe that it might float for a considerably longer period of time. So if we accept that the breakup happened at this point, this early breakup, I think we come inescapably to the conclusion that the breakup was not something that just happened as the ship made her final plunge, but the breakup caused the final plunge. The breakup determined when the ship sank, and therefore the breakup determined whether a lot of people lived or died.
What you just stated there is backed up by personal testimony. The order of the launching of the lifeboats was very orderly. It appears that the crew had in mind that they had longer to get people off. They knew that the ship was going to sink, but that they might have more time than what it turned out to be. So
there's crew members who actually state they did not think the ship was going to sink. They thought it would settle to a certain point and then it would stop sinking. I think that's what everyone was expecting, was that she would float as her own lifeboat until the Tarpathia got there, until rescue ships arrived.
Going to slow down the rate at which this...
So according to Roger Long's theory, those on board were caught unawares by the speed of the breakup. And if Titanic had floated longer, the few hours of extra time crew members had hoped for might have made all the difference. Today, the ship that was called unsinkable is dissolving away. Time and the ocean are completing what the iceberg began.
Eventually, it will collapse upon itself. There will still be pieces of Titanic forever. The beautiful propellers in the back are made of bronze. They will be there. The telemotor gears, they'll be there. But someday, unfortunately, the Titanic will be a big orange stain on the bottom of the Atlantic.
To protect the wreck, England, Canada, France, and the US have entered into an agreement to regulate retrieval of artifacts and prevent destructive exploration. In the meantime, the debris field remains largely undocumented.
This is an event that happened in the dark 93 years ago. So no one is ever going to be completely satisfied. Nothing is ever going to be 100% proven. But I think we've come a long, long way towards understanding it.
Against all the odds, the team have solved the biggest mystery left by the disaster of April 14th, 1912. After decades of debate, we now know what really happened in Titanic's final moments.